Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1999 sequel, Freeway II, Confessions of a Trickbaby. Now, this is one of the most demented, wild, crazy films that I've seen in a long time. And that's saying a lot because the first Freeway is pretty up there when it comes to the wildness and the weirdness that cinema has to offer. But Freeway 2 is arguably even more demented and even more crazy. And I think in some ways that's a positive, in other ways, not. I liked this film, but I can definitely see why some people are not a fan of this at all. They think it's too trashy, too exploitative, too out there, to the point where they have a hard time with the film. And I get it. I can totally understand that thought process, but man, I just appreciated the fact that this film was willing to go as far as it did. It had not only just balls, it had big, massive balls, some major cojones. And it's directed by Matthew Bright, who also wrote the film. And Matthew says that this wasn't intended to be a sequel to Freeway, but there's a character from Freeway in the movie. So I don't necessarily buy that. It's a sequel in a way that it takes place in the same universe, so to speak, as the first Freeway, but it's not a direct sequel to like Vanessa Lutz or anything involving her character. So it's not a sequel in that regard, but it definitely, I think it's insinuated that it definitely takes place in the same realm as the first Freeway. And this one was even more of a lower budget affair than the first. And as a result, there are some moments when it comes to the look of the film and just the direction overall where it's not quite as slick and as consistently solid as the direction in the first movie. I think Bright's direction here is still ultimately a bright spot for the film because he still has a flair and a certain knack for visual uh, depravity and insanity, and still has a fair amount of wild but controlled uh, camera work in this. But it's not as ambitious when it comes to the camera work as Freeway. You don't see as many wide shots, for instance, or as many POV shots. It's definitely a lot more of a film that is less daring in that regard. And I think part of it probably has to do with the limitations. And also, I read that Matthew did not have the best time on set and on location when he was shooting this film. So that might have bled into the direction where it's a little less dynamic than what he brought to the first film. It's not bad. It's still pretty serviceable, still pretty decent in its own right, considering the fact that it was a very low budget production. And I think he did get a couple good performances from his cast, but it definitely isn't on the same level as what he did in Freeway. The screenplay by Bright. Here's the thing about the script. I appreciate that yet again he goes for the jugular, but even goes farther this time around. He goes for the jugular, rips off the head, and shits and pisses down the throat. And then lights the head on fire. Like he absolutely just goes to places that very few writers or filmmakers would dare to go with this script. So you have a decent amount of social commentary, just like the first movie. Uh, instead of it being a satire of the media and police a procedure and the police in general, and the way that people view criminals in society, it's more of a satire of certain other social issues like bulimia and child trafficking and transphobia and other things of that nature. I've seen people review this movie and think that it's just being actively offensive, like it when it comes to these particular elements of the script. The fact that there's this psycho named Sister Gomez who is a transvestite and has an underground series of tunnels with all these kids that are being used for sex trafficking and for a snack because this woman is also a cannibal. I think a lot of people are looking at that and thinking that it's some kind of message that the writer is having about trans people in general and what he thinks about them. But I don't really think that's the case. It's more of another instance, like in the first Freeway, where he's exaggerating things to show the absurdity of how some people might view trans people. Like this film has like moments in it where I swear to God, the people at Fox News would probably think that this is like actually happening. And there's other bits and pieces when it comes to the social commentary as well, like the bulimia aspects and the whole troubled youth thing, and just the differences between uh, your typical criminal youth and somebody who is completely off their rocker and is a serial killer, but how despite the depraved actions of some of these individuals in this script, there are still morals that they have. They still aren't completely immoral despite the actions that they commit, which creates a lot of interesting uh, um, dynamic elements throughout the script that really make you think about morality and how this concept of people who are killers in society have no morals is maybe not necessarily as cut and dry as you might think. So it's also very much a script, though, that is not as focused as it could be. The first film I felt for the most part was pretty consistently focused, had a good, consistent hook and overall tone and way that it was telling its twist on a familiar fairy tale in A Little Red Riding Hood. In Freeway 2, yet again, Matthew Bright is trying to do a twisted take on another fairy tale, but this time around is Hansel and Gretel. And I don't think it's as well put together as his work in the script for the first Freeway. First off, the lead character, White Girl, which is her slang name isn't the right word, but her nickname is White Girl. So Crystal Van Meter, from the beginning of the story and throughout the entirety of the story, she's not really a character that you root for as much, despite her rough edges. She's more rough around the edges than even somebody like Vanessa Lutz in the first Freeway. And so there isn't that same sense of, oh, well, she's doing the wrong thing or she's doing wrong things and she's saying the wrong thing, but she's still kind of a victim. And so you still sympathize with her and you still, in some way or another, root for her to stop this killer. You don't really get that with Freeway 2. Also, the dynamic between her and her serial killer friend Cyclona is also something that I think at points can come across a little forced when it comes to them like still having some kind of genuine friendship despite the actions of Cyclona and them falling in love. Them falling in love in particular feels very forced and like something that the writer just threw in there to once again kind of provide another shock to the system, so to speak, by having an excuse for a lesbian love scene. I didn't really buy the love story between the two. It would be like if Vanessa and the girl, the Hispanic girl in Freeway, just all of a sudden started banging each other, or she actually did fall for Brittany Murphy's character. That doesn't really, that wouldn't have worked in the context of that script, and it doesn't work here either. It's trying to make some sort of sweet love story amidst all the carnage and all the bodies that are piling up in the wake of Cyclona, but it just doesn't really click. And speaking of the stuff with Cyclona, you get the reference and you get a little bit here and there when it comes to Sister Gomez and how she is incorporated into the script and the story, but it just leaves everything so vague because it wants to provide a twist at the end. But because of that, there's no like prime antagonist, like what happened in Freeway. And yes, there wasn't necessarily just a protagonist and antagonist dynamic in Freeway, because in a lot of ways, Vanessa was also very antagonistic in her own right. But there was still a very viable threat that was putting her at risk, and you don't really get that with Freeway 2. Also, some of the attempts at being gross out and being edgy were a little too over the top. Like there's a whole scene where the white girl she just projectile vomits like she's possessed by Pazuzu in The Exorcist. It was absurd. It was unpredictable to see Crystal do that, but if you think about it in hindsight, it doesn't really fit with the context of the scene or the tone of the film up until that point. Also don't feel it's as funny as Freeway was. There's a lot of attempts and a lot of moments here which trying to elicit some of the same laughs when it comes to some of the outrageous scenarios and some of the outrageous dialogue, but it doesn't really work on the same level. There's still a few moments here and there, some quotes, some scenes, pretty much any scene involving David Alan Grier's character, Mr. Butts, who is this lawyer who, in a lot of ways, is also a pimp. At least he acts that way. That is something that definitely does provide some laughs, as does some of the moments between uh, uh, Crystal and Cyclona. There's some lines from Sister Gomez that are pretty warped, but also pretty funny. And speaking of warped and funny, when the diabolical duo of Cyclona and Crystal go to Mexico after they broke out of their captivity, which is at another facility for these troubled girls. They break out, they go on the run, they steal a car, they get high on spray paint, they wind up finding a house. Well, actually, no. This They find the house first, and Cyclona kills everybody who is in the house. and that causes a bit of a conflict between her and Crystal. But then they eventually find a way to make up, and they steal a car and they go on the run again. But they basically just ruined the car because they're just high and drunk, and now they have to go about it on foot. They wind up at the border, and they cross the border, and then they wind up in Mexico. And this is where Cyclona uh, gets Crystal to go see Sister Gomez, because Cyclona has this belief that Sister Gomez is somebody who's there to help her, has helped her in the past in terms of protecting her from these abusers. Because just like in Freeway, these characters, they have a long history of psychological and physical and sexual abuse that has, in a lot of ways, contributed to their psychosis and to their murderous actions or their criminal behavior. And there ultimately is a twist that's revealed that Sister Gomez is not who she says she is. She's actually a witch, like a 1,000-year-old uh, demonic witch from hell, essentially, who kept Cyclona when she was a kid, along with all these other children, and used them for very nefarious and disgusting purposes involving sex trafficking and child pornography. And her recollection and memories of these strange men and this UFO and Sister Gomez being there to save her is actually memories of these strange men assaulting her in Sister Gomez's uh, depraved tunnels under her location, under her church, and the UFO is just a light in the room that's lighting the just disgusting acts. And this ultimately leads to her and Crystal taking out Sister Gomez and her henchmen. One of them is apparently a hunchback who's also half man, half goat. And they take out Sister Gomez by putting her into an oven and burning her alive, like the witch in Hansel and Gretel. And there's other Hansel and Gretel elements other than that too. There's a scene where Crystal and Cyclona, they get off a train, because there's a large chunk of the movie where they're just on a train where they meet up with Larry from Freeway, the stepdad of Vanessa, and they wind up killing him and taking his crack. And then his crack winds up becoming the writer's equivalent for the breadcrumbs in the Hansel and Gretel story. But instead of it being breadcrumbs, it's crack rocks. But instead of it leading their way back to the train, some homeless people pick up all the crack rocks, and so now they're just stuck, and so that's why they ultimately wind up going to the border and wind up going to Mexico. And of course, along the way, there's stuff that happens where things go awry. Cyclona takes things too far and kills some border patrol agents, so now that leads to Crystal being considered a major suspect in those murders. And this is directly after she was let off of her previous crime that she was convicted of and was sentenced to like 25 years in this facility for, due to a technicality. So she was already let off for that crime, but at that point she's on the run with Cyclona, who's a serial killer. And now she's got this other rap that she's got to deal with. But by the end of the movie, she gets off of that too somehow, because she is responsible for freeing all these kids from the clutches of Sister Gomez, and takes out Sister Gomez and her henchmen uh, with dual pistols, with two guns, and gets back with her attorney in Mr. Butts, and essentially just rides off into the sunset with him while she's literally writing him. And there is some tragic undertones with Cyclona, where Cyclona said something along the lines of, well, if I'm going to be caught, you're going to have to do me, have to kill me. I'm not going to go back to jail. And so there's this emotional moment where Crystal shoots her friend Cyclona, but I didn't really buy the friendship as much as other critics did, and I didn't buy the love story as much. So it wasn't as tragic and as sad of a moment as I think Bright was trying to make it out to be. And as much as I like the just absolute batshit insanity of the Mexico scene sequences that take place mostly in the third act, it's kind of a letdown though, because that just shows you a film that you wish you had for the majority of the runtime instead of what you had before, which was in a lot of ways a pretty lesser version of Freeway. If you really think about it, it really was a lesser version of Freeway with a lot of bulimia, like a lot of scenes of a lot of girls just puking and throwing up. And I get what the writer was trying to go for with that, with the social commentary, but it almost got to the point where it felt like it was more exploitative than it was actually trying to have some kind of message. And I think a lot of ways that's just the writer once again trying to be as abrasive as possible, just like he was with Freeway, but things just aren't as consistently on point when it comes to the levels of abrasiveness. It's almost too abrasive at times. It's too abhorrent. It's too gross. It's too unsettling. It's too difficult to really get into when it comes to the narrative or the story. And tonally, it's definitely a lot more inconsistent than the first film was. I definitely feel that if it was more of a horror comedy, like a horror dark comedy that took place entirely in Mexico, and it's all about this underground cult and this witch that's leading it who masquerades as a transvestite, I think that would be a better movie. Then you could really flesh out the horror elements more, and I would probably soften the edges a little bit on Cyclona. And I know what they were trying to do. Like, yeah, she's just indiscriminately killing people, and it's supposed to be kind of funny because of the fact that she doesn't know any better, and she's just an impulsive serial killer. But the way that it played out, it really wasn't funny. It just came across like she's just screwed in the head and doesn't and is just an awful person. So it's just it is one of those films, script wise and story wise, that it's not as strong as it could be, and definitely not as strong as its predecessor. But I think it does have a really good cast, especially the lead actress, Natasha Lyonne, who I love. I think she is a great actress. She's really good in this Netflix show called Russian Doll. She's also really good in Orange is the New Black. She's also great in a film called Anti-Birth. And she's honestly one of my favorite actresses that are working today. And this is a fairly early role for her, and it's a difficult role, and I think she did a great job with it. This character is in a lot of ways even worse and even more of a sociopathic, psychopathic, just absolute vile, vicious person in comparison to Vanessa Lutz from Freeway. But Natasha Lyonne brings a certain charm and a certain charisma to the character that still makes the character worth watching, and it still makes the film, in a lot of ways, engaging because of her performance and what she brings to this character. Uh, she is even willing to have. There's even moments where she's showing vulnerability and she's showing emotion, and the tough girl facade breaks down, and you see her inner soul, and it's some pretty compelling, pretty strong acting by Leone, and she's really good when it comes to the dark comic stuff. She's definitely got a believable attitude to her. So when it comes to her sticking up for herself or the people that she cares about, it doesn't come across like it's an act. Like the whole scene where she breaks out the two guns and talks about how she's a ministry of death. It's actually a line that works and is actually kind of badass. And because of that, I wish you had more scenes like that and more of the stuff in Mexico and more of her, using the guns and making it more of like a really crazy, wild, over the top action horror dark comedy. Um but what you do get here is still some really good work overall by Natasha Lyonne. Maria Celedonio is a Cyclona. She's not as good to me personally. I think she has some decent chemistry with Natasha, but it's not as strong as it could be because of the strength of the writing. Because a lot of the dynamic between the two is very just at each other's throats, and it doesn't really seem like the two really are close with one another. They're just putting up with each other. And when they try to make it into something where they are becoming close and lovers, it just doesn't really work. And it's not really anything that Maria did. It's just what she had to work with. But I will be honest, I don't think she's as good comedically. And I definitely don't think she's as good of an actress as Natasha Lyonne. Because there's a lot of moments of the line delivery in particular where it's a bit flat. And there's other moments where she's supposed to be manic, and it just comes across like she's, kind of forcing things a bit too much when it comes to the manic nature of the character. And I definitely didn't find her to be that intimidating, despite the fact that she's killing all these people. Um, but yeah, it's not that bad of a performance, but it's not great either. Vincent Gallo though was great. Like the guy is, if you look up this guy and you actually look at a lot of the stuff that he believes in and the stuff that he does and the things that he's into on his free time that don't involve acting, he's kind of a scumbag, but he plays a great villain in this. So much so that I wish you had more of this Sister Gomez character, because this is a pretty strong villainous performance. And it's a very just daring and ballsy performance. He does not hesitate when it comes to being just so just disgusting and immoral and gross, and actually does a good job too with the effeminate nature of the character in a way where it actually comes across like it's actually somewhat of a genuine portrayal of somebody who might be a transvestite or might be transgender. But I don't think Sister Gomez is actually transgender or even necessarily in reality a genuine transvestite. It's all an act. It's all a facade. It's all a ploy to hide her true nature and her true intent. Um, and there's definitely a lot of that sinister note that's applied to the performance by Gallo. I think it's honestly one of his better performances as an actor. David Alan Grier was hilarious. He was a riot as Mr. Butts. Like, it was honestly one of the funniest things I've seen David Alan Grier do in a film since something like Blank Man, when he was the partner of Damon Wayans in that movie. Uh, you have Michael T. Weiss, who reprises his role as Larry from Freeway, just as much of a scumbag as he was in that film. You got John Landis, that John Landis who plays a judge he was the one who sentences Crystal at the start of the movie, and I'm like, wow, is that kind of messed up? That's kind of fucked up if you think about it, considering what he did on the set of Twilight Zone and how he was on trial for manslaughter, and here you have him as a judge who's handing out sentences to people. That's pretty messed up when you think about it. I don't know about that. That's definitely a ballsy casting choice. And you also have Max Perlich, who plays a character named Flacco, who he's barely even in the movie, but you might recognize him because he was in films like Rush with Jason Patrick. And you have Nicole Parker Smith, who plays a character named Mousy. It's not a very big role, but like if you see it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's her. She was in Mad TV. She was one of the cast members of, I think, like the last few seasons of the show, and she was also in crap like a disaster movie, an epic movie. So that's not really a massive plus for her. But it was still kind of fun to see her in something else other than disaster movie. Um, so yeah, the cast for the most part I think was fine. Definitely a lot of the heavy lifting is done by Natasha Lyonne, and I think she did a really great job doing as much as she possibly could with what she was given to work with. The cinematography by Joel Ransom, it's not risible, but it's not excellent or amazing. It's fine for what the film is. The editing is in the same boat by Suzanne Hines. It's serviceable. It's decent enough. The music by Kennard Ramsey and Louise Post. I don't really remember a lot of the music in this, so it's one of those scores where it just is kind of in one ear out the other, and then you don't even really think about it by the time the movie is over. It's, I guess, somewhat effective when it comes to help creating a certain mood or atmosphere, but other than that, that's about it. It's just somewhat effective mood music. The original songs for the soundtrack, I don't really remember a lot of them, so that's definitely something I think was a bit lacking. And yeah, this is definitely inferior in the score and music department in comparison to Freeway. Surprised they didn't have more like indie punk rock music or something for this soundtrack. I'm kind of surprised. Seemed like something that would honestly fit this film very well. Um, it's like 97 minutes, but it does drag a little bit, especially in the first half. It picks up a lot once they get to Mexico. And that's definitely where the best elements of this film are. Because everything else up to that point is just kind of an all right prison and road movie with a very demented and sick, twisted bent. I think the review by Jason Korsner is pretty accurate when it comes to this movie. It's like perhaps the most gratuitously violent and vulgar road movie imaginable. That is pretty accurate when it comes to this movie. Um, so if that interests you, if this kind of wild and depraved craziness is something that you feel is worth a watch, I'd say check this out sometime because it is just like the first film. It's unquestionably unique. Like there isn't another Freeway II. There isn't another movie that I can think of that is on this level of just pure insanity, for better or worse. And I think in large part that's why I still like the film, despite all my issues with it, is because of the fact that it was so wild. It was so out there and unique and interesting, and because it just took so many risks and had so much in it that was just unpredictable and just offensive and all kinds of non-PC. Like, this is like one of the most non-PC films that I think exist. This is the kind of movie you show to some people who are all about PC culture and things being politically correct, and watch their heads spin and then fly off their necks and then explode, because it's that kind of a movie when it comes to its subject matter. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Freeway 2, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.